Everybody, welcome to the Initalian Informational. Glad to have all of you here. Today we're going to be having a lecture on defining the user interface and user experience design from somebody very experienced in the field, Ranjan. A bit about him. He actually also gave an informational a few weeks ago on the business side, so it's going to be interesting to hear about his experience in tech and what he has to say to the STEM interns and everybody else in this lecture. So a bit about him. Ranjan's a product management executive with over 20 years of experience building new products and growing businesses for enterprise networking, cloud, cybersecurity, and big data analytics. He has an MBA from Santa Clara University and a BS in computer science from IIT. In his spare time, he loves to coach teams for robotics competitions and go on trail runs or mountain bikes on Saratoga Hills. I'll now hand it over to Ranjan.
So I'm not a UI UX expert from a perspective of that I'm actually a developer of UI, but I work kind of day in, day out with my team of UI developers and UX experts, building newer type of applications like big data analytics applications with a lot of machine learning, AI, ML behind the scene for those applications. The work you guys are doing is slightly different because more oriented towards websites and how different type of personas use those websites. So today's session, I'll be speaking to more towards what your use cases are versus how I've been developing UI UX or analytics applications, which is slightly different. As you go deeper into this field, you'll start to realize. So we'll keep it a bit high level. I don't know a lot of your expertise level. So if you think you want to go deeper into the conversation, yeah, I'll be glad to and ask me questions if you think it's too deep. So don't mind and asking even if you think is a dumb question. No question is a dumb question. So feel free to interject and keep it interactive. So what we'll cover first will some key terms, like anytime you talk to a UI UX expert in this field, there are a bunch of terms they will use. So I want to make sure we are on the same baseline in understanding those terms. And some specifics around homepage in terms of layout and what are the basic principles in designing a homepage for whether it's a website or whether it's an application or a mobile application. Similar kind of principles. We'll go through those. After that, we'll go through the UI design best practices, the search engine optimization best practices, information architecture. A lot of you might not have heard this term, so I will go through it from a UI UX perspective. Very critical term. And whatever is associated with behind that. I'll talk about prototyping, what's involved there. That's a big component of UI and UX, and then Q&A later. But we'll keep it interactive, so anytime we have any questions, and I'll try to stop in the middle and ask you guys a question in terms of what you understand. So let's start with key terms. So these are all alphabetical in order. You should have access to this slide deck also in future if you want to use these terms. A and B testing is a very common term from a UI and especially user experience perspective. What it really means is as people develop websites, a lot of time they have kind of two options in front of them. Hey, should I design the site this way? It's not just for the whole site. A lot of time it's just a one particular feature in the site or a form that you want to publish, and say you have a team of people and they have different opinions. So what you end up doing is you will say there's a version A and version B, and you kind of bunch those ideas together between those two versions, version A and version B, because from a usability testing perspective, it's easier to ask, do you like A versus B versus saying, hey, I've got these five options, A, B, C, D, E, and then between these five options, which one is your option? And that becomes too convoluted for a lot of customers and users. So that's where the concept of A and B testing comes in. You don't have to go through A and B testing for every feature you're designing. It's just a concept that is useful. If you, through your user testing, majority of your design ideas are fairly simple and people, especially your target audience, understand those concepts, then it's pretty good. You don't have to go through A and B testing. It's only in scenarios where you are stumbling and you want to say, okay, let me try from a totally different angle. So that's A and B testing. Backlog is a developer term. So software developers use this concept. For some of you, it might be new, but if you're a software developer, it's fairly standard. It's basically, as the term says, it's a backlog of all the work items that are on your task list. And in an agile kind of methodology, and again, agile is a term that is also fairly common in the software development work. And what happens in agile methodology is a team of developers, say maybe there are 4 or 5 people with different titles, a UI expert, UX expert, software developer, backend developer, database developer, and they take a task from a to-do list of the backlog, and they work that. Once a product owner says, hey, you are done, then they move on to the next task. So that's basically how they organize themselves. Breadcrumb is also a term that will be fairly common among UI and UX. And when you hear the term breadcrumb, what it basically means, and I'm showing this at the bottom picture, is you have a view of where you are in your website from a hierarchy perspective. So if you are like 3 clicks down in the product, so you starting from the home page, then you were in the product category, then you picked the subcategory, and finally you got to a page. That hierarchy actually shown as a breadcrumb on the top of the page, and that allows you to move back and forth. And for a lot of people, it's slightly better than, there's a browser back button, but a lot of time you forget how you came to this particular page. So the breadcrumbs are that way useful. Minimum viable product, is again a very common term in the software world, sometimes in hardware world also. What it essentially means is any website development, any software development, you cannot have all the features finished within the first kind of release. Let me close the window. So what happens is you define this concept of minimal viable product and say, this is my version 1 definition of the product, that without this product, I don't have a useful website with basic functionality. So that will be the definition of minimal viable product. And after that, you can keep on iterating and adding more features. Responsive website, another fairly common term. What it basically means is when you design a website, especially these days, you have to assume that people are coming to that website with different type of devices, iPads, iPhones, even laptops, 15-inch laptop to 13-inch laptop and things like that. So when you're designing your pages and forms and complex interactions, you need to make sure they work well. A lot of time it's mostly testing and the type of UI components you're using that allow for the responsive website. SEO, I will go into a bit more detail later on, search engine optimization. Obviously, the big part of putting a website is making sure people can get to it. And as you know, people get to websites through Google search or Bing or other mechanisms. And SEO is a mechanism that allows your website to show up very high in these searches. So this is just one statistics that 75% of searches never go beyond the first page of search results. So if you do a testing after you have done, say, your first website publishing, and you find out, you go to the Google and put some of the terms that you want your searchers to use to get to your website. And with those terms, if your site doesn't show up in first 1 or 2 pages of the search results, then you have to rework your SEO.
What like just curiously, like why like what's the main point of using breadcrumbs? What can it be used for specifically?
Yeah, so if you see, for example, Amazon, and you go to Amazon and you're searching for footwear, and if you recall, Amazon has this concept of product categories, and you can come to athletic wear or dresses and shoes. There are multiple ways you can come to a particular subcategory. And a lot of time, especially in a busy site, it may be very confusing to figure out, okay, how do I came to this page? And if I want to go back one category up, how do I go back? Because there may be links after links after links. So when you go through browser back button, it might lead you to different results. So the breadcrumbs that way are very useful. If you have a particular hierarchy and you show that hierarchy of your website as the users navigate the website right on the top of the page. So the example I'm showing here, this home button is the home button for the website. So suppose you're designing a inner talent website, so that is the home page for the website. And then within that, suppose you have a high level category of online lessons. Within that, you have a subcategory, say physics lessons. So that's how you would design it. And then there may be within that physics lesson, you may have a third level category, say middle school physics lessons. And that would be kind of a breadcrumb that you can start to navigate up and down.
Uh, Thank you.
Sure. So let's go through a very basic homepage design. I'm using an example of a school website. Obviously, a lot of you have gone through your own school's website. So you should start paying attention, especially when you're actually designing a website, how other websites are designed. And there are usually a reason a lot of these websites have a similar layout. There may be small changes here and there. So for example, in this particular website I'm showing, the home button is on the top left. So when you have breadcrumbs, that home button is helpful, and the breadcrumbs will show up after that. So that layout of next couple of pages will not change. The search button is always helpful. Some sites have on the left, a lot of other sites have on the right, but just make sure it's in the same place on every single page. Otherwise, you'll cause confusion. A logo for your site, some images. So my previous talk was about your target audience. So whenever you pick your design elements for your site, for example, the color scheme, the images, the font, and the style of the font, you obviously are basing that based on who you are communicating to, who's the user of your website. Is it parents? Is it school kids, college kids? Is it administrators? So obviously, based on different profile of your target audience, you will pick these design elements of your site accordingly. There are other minor items like staff directory or a directory of contacts and things like that. So these are on the top are items which are kind of consistent throughout every page of your site. And these are like the most common tasks that the website users will be looking for. So you put these most common tasks at the top of the bar here. And then that's how you start to create a hierarchy of your site. And then the same site may have different type of people coming in. So for example, on a school site, you may have parents coming in for information, you have students coming in, you have community members, staff members, administrators coming in. So you kind of organize your site and the content on the site according to the target audience you have. And sometimes the design elements change. Sometimes you may have the same design element, but the content is organized depending on the target audience. So, so there are a couple of reasons you do an early research of who will be the users of your website, and what are they looking for in terms of content, what's their end goal. You document all of that kind of early, so that different people who are designing the website, whether UX people, the UI developers, the backend developers, they all are kind of aligned on those basic concepts behind that website. So there's no confusion between the team members.
I had a question about
Sure.
like the website design. Yeah. So I know like although each design kind of has its own like good and bad things necessarily, what kind of universal things are good for designs, especially something like a website, and what universal things are like not particularly great?
Yeah, so I think these days the first basic principle of the website design is to make sure you account for different type of devices. Um, so in this case, like I'm showing this website on a in a landscape mode on an iPhone. So when you're designing the website, you just have to assume that the people are going to, even if it's the same one type of person, type of end users, they will be accessing the website from different type of devices, which have different size characteristics. Including on the mobile devices, you cannot assume that even if you have a mobile app, that people are accessing your website using that mobile app. They may be still coming to through a website because it's just basic laziness of people that, hey, I was searching through Google or somebody emailed me a link, and I am clicking on that link, and it opened up on a Safari on my iPhone or iPad. And obviously you don't want to go through the hassle of downloading the app and then accessing the website, even if you did a lot of work to make sure that website shows up well on a mobile device using your iPhone app. And you may find out during further analysis that people are still using your web page to access the site on a mobile phone versus your mobile app. So that's just one basic principle. The other thing is, you typically always are testing the effectiveness of your site, which means how many. So Google has Google Analytics, and that shows on a per site basis, per page basis, how much time your users are spending on your website and web pages. Are they abandoning the site? From where they're coming? What's happening next after they visit that page? All of that. Once you have that understanding, you try to then make sure there's an efficient use of your end users' time. You're not wasting their time. So if it's taking them 3 clicks to get to a page, you want to make sure that if a lot of people are going through that hassle, you have a quick links bar somewhere on your homepage, and that particular link to that page is within the quick links bar. So those are some of the quick wins you can get with your customers. So I think the first thing for any application or UI or website design is to know your target user or users. And we went through it last time. You can go through my presentation from last time. When I say know your user, we went to a 1 hour talk on that. But essentially, each type of user may have a different way they perceive the information, read the information, consume the information. Uh, so your website needs to basically visually appeal to that user type. So that's the first thing. Then second thing is there's some basic aspects of how people read, obviously. So you start reading any content from top left. So a lot of time, what happens, and I've seen it even in a professional setting, that you're designing a very complex site, and you have a graphics here, you have a graphics there, and you're basically matching the graphics and the layout. And very soon, you forget that people are reading from left to right, and you are so involved in matching the colors and layouts and graphics that it looks pretty, but you're when you actually are consuming the information, it's confusing. So you want to make sure it's not just about prettiness, it's about how how the user is consuming the information, and they typically read from left to right. So when I design my applications, I typically, the most popular items I put on the top left, the least popular items I put on the bottom right. That's something I just do on an ongoing basis. Um, then is you once you have a good understanding of your users, you will understand that what they want to achieve through the website and what are those most popular tasks. So if your, for example, website has a list of 20 things a different type of people can come and do, you may put a ranking of those 20 things and say, of these, which ones are the most popular. Now, before you publish the site, you may have your own understanding or perception of what is the most popular task going to be. But as I just said, you will need to use your Google Analytics and other analytics on the website to actually monitor on an ongoing basis that what are the popular tasks and kind of promote those tasks higher in the visual hierarchy of your website. And the low frequency tasks, which very few people are using, you put them actually deeper in the site, so there's a less clutter on the site. You don't want all the tasks right on the home page. That will be just too much clutter. Okay. Then other big aspect of the site are usually the interactive elements, like example forms, where you have to ask certain information from your user, they fill in that information, and then you present additional tasks to them or additional capabilities based on those interactive elements. So whenever you design these elements, first thing is to make sure there may be different fields you're asking for customer user input, mark them mandatory or optional. And optional, basically, you assume people are not filling those in if you mark anything optional. So your site should still be functional, and you should have some defaults in these fields. And whenever there's a very complex data entry, just give certain examples so people understand what they have right. Because the worst thing is people get frustrated and move out of the site because the form entry was very complicated. They didn't know what type of data they have to enter, or they tried to enter the data 1 or 2 times. It gave an error, and then they just got frustrated. And whenever, so if it's a like a free text type of data entry tool, you have to assume in the backend code that there may be just random data in it. So all your error checking and things like that, you need to account for it. And because of that, a lot of time people just have very hard choices, saying, okay, you have to choose between these 3 or 4 choices, and there's a drop-down list. But if you have a very long list of those choices that you give, then it becomes too complicated also. So you always give like only not more than 3 or 4 choices, and simplify it as much as possible. And when you have a form ready that you have designed, just make sure you test it with some real users. Even if it's a paper test, it's not actual UI or with software behind it. So the way I do the testing is I start with some paper design test before software developers put it in HTML or CSS format. And then just the UI test. So the layout and color schemes and things like that are good. And then finally, the UI and the backend all connected to make sure the data entry and the error checking and all of that is good. So you can imagine there's so much of testing going on before you finalize a form.
So I was just curious, what's the best way to like know your target user? What are some like channels that we could find user types through, especially if we wanted to like test our website with like interactive users and like get feedback?
Yeah, great questions. I think before you start with the website, there's a purpose for that site. There could be non-profit, it could be for-profit, and you put a mission statement saying my site is going to do this for these type of users. So I'm just generalizing. You can give me an example. I can go through that example with you. But let me start with a general statement, and then we can pick a specific example, maybe in a talent example.
Sure.
So when you have a mission statement saying, okay, this is what my site is going to do for these type, what is it going to do, and for what type of or for this category of users, say students. Now, student is a very high level profile. It doesn't really help a UI developer that what does it mean? Is it a student means a elementary school student, middle school, college student? Because obviously the site appeal would be very different if you're designing it for an elementary school student versus a college student. So that's second level of clarity that you would need, that what is the type of user. A lot of time from a segmentation perspective, you have to segment further. It may be language skill. So if it's an elementary school student, obviously you don't want to use very hard words with them. And if it's a college student, you don't want to use very simplistic language. Means it will feel that it's not really speaking to them. So you would, for a college student, you would want a fun language, more literal language versus elementary school student. So those are the scenarios. Um, the second is from a geographic perspective, like the language. So a lot of time you may want to translate. So suppose Inner Talent is reaching out to students who are non-English students or not, in English not as a first language student. So you may have to have kind of a translated version of the site or certain sections of the site that are like very complicated in say Spanish or other languages which your target user are more familiar with. So those are the things then based on the profile of the user, you have to kind of take into consideration.
Yeah, but I was also just like that helped a lot actually. That definitely makes sense. But I was also wondering just like what kind of channels would we use then after we figure this all out and we figure like who we're targeting, how would we like what kind of channels would we use to like find real users that we could test this with other than people
Yeah,
inside in the town?
sure. So what happens in the corporate world is we use, for example, the same marketing channel to reach out to when the site is launched. You have certain mechanisms to go promote the site. But as part of the market research, you would have reach out to those type of people to build the profile of the service that you want to build. So you will continue to kind of harness the same mechanisms either through the marketing means or some other means. It's a bit difficult question to answer because it's very situational specific. Um, so for inner talent, for example, so if you are working with other nonprofits and who are sending their users to you, then you work with that nonprofit and say, hey, can you give me a couple of users in this profile that I want to interview? And then as part of that process, you show them visual designs and work in progress designs and get their opinion.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay. So let's go to SEO question. So SEO is a big part of today's websites because essentially, if you don't pay attention to SEO, search engine optimization, you're essentially in the dark web. uh, the fun part of the dark web is if you're a hacker, you do everything against the SEO rules that you don't show up in the first 100 of Google search results because you want to get buried in the Google search and nobody finds you except the bad people. But obviously, if you're targeting good people, you want to be in the first page of the Google search and maybe worst case scenario, the second page. So how do you get to the first page of the Google search? So there's a blog. This is an art in itself. So if you don't understand some of these concepts, uh, just assume that a lot of corporations pay money to uh, consultants who, once the website gets created, whose only job is to optimize the site for SEO best results. So this is a science in itself. On top of that, so Google, their Google kind of best practices, specifically Google changes their algorithm on an ongoing basis, how they basically promote a particular site among search results. Obviously, if you pay to Google through sponsored search, you will show up higher, but not everybody is capable of paying Google. That's pretty costly, especially if you are in a category that is very crowded category. So suppose for in a talent, the category is online learning. As you can imagine, online learning today is a very, very crowded category. So if you want to pay Google that anyone who's searching for online learning gets in a talent in the first, say, 100 search results or even 100 first 50 search results in the first 2 pages, you'll have to pay quite a bit to Google. So without paying itself, you still have certain mechanisms that you naturally or organically can show up higher within the Google search. So these 9 things I'm listing here, they're part of this is not just my best practices. This is the industry best practices. Um, so first thing is you identify essentially um, what tags or descriptions are aligned well with your site and what are the terms that people are using to search for those. You can use Google Analytics tool again, and in the Analytics tool, what you can do is enter those terms and see the frequency of those terms being used over time. So that will allow you to figure out which terms to pick and how you basically optimize the site, your site, to those terms. But once you've picked those terms, then you want to make sure that all the tags buried in your HTML and the description of those tags are well aligned to those terms. So online learning is just one term. So if you're selling footwear, so say sneakers, so sneaker would be one term. So everywhere on your site, you will be using sneakers and in one way or another way. Um, then other thing is both 3 and 4 speak to the same thing that Google's search engine algorithm uses the page speed. And if your website is hosted on a very slow server that has a very low bandwidth link, or the pages are not organized optimally, the HTML and the JavaScript is designed that it's taking too much time, then Google search engine on its own will rank your page lower compared to the other websites for the same tag, same kind of term. uh, if they have a page that loads up faster, Google will show that page higher in the search results. So just keep that in mind. So you need to keep testing your site. You need to make sure the pages are loading quickly, and the images are optimized. So I'm showing one example, the same on the top right, the panda image. If you're posting it through JPEG, it only takes 63 kilobytes versus a PNG format that's taking 307 kilobytes. So obviously on a slower link, the PNG is going to take longer time to load. So just keep those things in mind. A lot of images need to be compressed and cleaned up before you just copy them from somewhere, a high resolution, say HD quality image, and you think you're doing a great job of posting a HD quality image on your site. It may not actually do you good if it is slowing your website down. Then the fifth thing is about linking, both internally linking your different pages. So amount of linkages to your page basically ranks the page up also. External linkage to your page. So that's where a lot of time you pay other people, the bloggers and other influencers who are typically higher in the search results, that they mention your page or link to your pages from their content, and that will make sure your page will eventually get promoted more. So these are just some of these examples of the SEO best practices. There are lots more, but I'll stop here because this is a big topic.
No, it's like, so basically, I heard that you were a product manager, so I was just wondering, like, what's a challenging UI or UX experience project that you faced, and how did you exactly manage it?
Okay, sure. I can give an example of my current product I'm working on. So it's a big data analytics product with AI ML engine. This is a SaaS product. Um, Not many examples of a product like that currently. So one or two examples. So the first, my challenge is my whole team is virtual. So I can't whiteboard with people, especially with a visual heavy where I can't show them other examples. So it's making it very difficult to collaborate with everyone. So it requires me basically everything I'm saying, just making sure I'm blogging it, putting on Confluence page so people can understand, have very more frequent meetings. So this is just, I think, a very a challenge that is very time sensitive based on COVID situation. The other challenge that comes, suppose we were still meeting in a physical space and we could collaborate in front of a whiteboard. I've done that obviously in the previous projects. Then other challenges are like, how would my target user perceive it? Well, we may think that this is great, but my target user may not perceive it. So what I'm currently doing, so this is going to be a global product. So, and it has different personas and different industries, personas from different industries coming to it. And my product is not ready, my UI is not ready. So I end up kind of describing the concept to my potential customers and users in a Zoom call and get their opinion. And hey, does this concept help you? Do you face this problem today? How do you solve it? So just very exploratory, curious way of understanding what's going on in their day-to-day life for that particular problem statement and how they would solve it. Um, and then I pass that information to my UI developers to figure out, hey, are we on the right track to find a solution to the problem that our customers are facing? And then eventually, I'm asking them to build a very basic UI UX mockup without a backend. So right now we call it wireframing. I'll go through that prototyping later on. But wireframing is a concept that hey, you can just doodle on a piece of paper or an iPad without regards to a lot of UI restrictions. And then, so that's the work of a UX designer. And that allows me to show some of those mock-ups to the customer and say, okay, do you like this or not? Because me verbally describing it, a lot of times the challenge is I may be saying something and they may be thinking something totally different. So those mock-ups and wireframes are very helpful.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, where do you get like your inspiration from? Who in the industry do you like follow and read? Who's like your role model?
Yeah, great question. So I look at from a UI UX perspective, various sites that I like. Sometimes I look at from data visualization. So I'm very much interested in, especially big data. You have volumes of data. I'm very much interested in how you show that data in a meaningful manner. So there are a lot of TED Talks you can subscribe to that look at that topic. I can forward a TED Talk that I recently forwarded to my team. So he's a professor of statistics. I forgot in one of the universities, and he showed, for example, in one slide, in one graph, the evolution of human civilization, uh, maybe last 5,000 years. It's a very So huge amount of data, he said, and he had a 5 minute kind of description of what he was describing or showing in that one graph. So it just kind of motivates you to say, okay, this is like huge amount of information and content that somebody could just describe it, and very not only engaging visually but verbally also.
So given that InnoTalent has its hands in so many different buckets with now this internship and stuff that's happening online, like the summer classes and performances and different kinds of workshops, we actually end up create culminating a lot of different content. And so I think one of the big questions is that how should that content be organized in terms of boosting user engagement, increasing user experience, and also maintaining a clean user interface?
Yeah, I would say first, I think have a ownership of like so what you just said is a problem statement. Um, so besides that problem statement, then you need to have a goal and make sure the goal is measurable. So you say, okay, in 6 months from now, I want to. So we have a problem and we want to fix this problem. But what do you mean by fix? So what is that goal? And is that goal basically there's an industry term called SMART. I forgot the full aspect of the acronym, but basically it's measurable and it's time bound. And so you, whenever you put a goal, you have those aspects: quantifiable, measurable, time bound. And that's why I'm saying 6 months. You put a goal on that problem statement, and then you assign one or two people as actual owners of that goal. And they may have sub owners, but really one or two people who really think about that goal as their primary responsibility. Um, and then if it's too complicated a problem, then you kind of subdivide it into smaller chunks because you may not be able to achieve all of that by one or two people in say 1 or 2 months. So you kind of subdivide that problem and say, okay, let's make it into measurable milestones that maybe on a every other week basis we can measure our progress. So those are again common industry best practices: how you take a problem, define a goal, assign owners, and subdivide the problem so that people can collaborate on it.
I'm thinking of doing a part two to that, Ranjan. By the way, this is really good. And what's really cool is that you're actually approaching the whole internship cycle from here's a market segmentation, here's the requirements, and now here's how you position it. By the way, I looked up SMART for you because I do recall that, so I just wanted to share that with you. It's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. That I haven't seen that in a while, but that is actually an excellent way of defining the problem statement. And I kind of wanted to add on to Ina's challenge is that we are looking at a site that has a different kind of pull function, right? It's definitely that there are different kinds of messaging. Like this video, for instance, there will be parts of this that apply to the technical messaging rather than here's volunteers dancing at a senior center, or here's a 14-year-old teaching how to do 3D modeling, or so the quality and the types of content are different. And I want to look at see if you could address beyond the website. It's a very tough decision how to kind of focus on, do we put emphasis on the website, do we put it on FB, do we put it on LinkedIn, do we put it on, and how do we get this all kind of coordinated together as like kind of an ecosystem, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah,
that's a real
yeah.
challenge given limited resources.
It is a challenge, and I think one thing I would say is your social media strategy and as you build a website, they have to go hand in hand. So just make sure. So suppose you have a bunch of interns assigned for social media, just make sure the website design team and the social media design team or the marketing teams, they are kind of in sync, even if not on a day-to-day basis. but on an ongoing basis, and their linkages, the message and the content that you say. So for example, the way I build my product messaging is I have a very clear, succinct 25-word description of my product. And that's common like across all properties, whether you go to Twitter, you go to Facebook, you go to a Google search. I want to see that 25-word description consistently. And that consistency is key from a branding perspective, that when you want to create a brand, you have to make sure that user experience is very consistent. Then like 50 word to 50 word, and in the 50 word to 50 word descriptions, you have benefits, you have different personas, they start to come in. But your 25 word description obviously has to be tailoring to everyone. So if you can't do that, so then you have a problem, that you have to take the goal or the mission to a higher level. Yeah, yeah, but I think the big aspect is social media, and the challenge with the social media is basically it's more conversational. So you want to make sure uh, you carry those, you keep those conversations alive on an ongoing basis. But every time you have a conversation, there is kind of linkage back to the content, and so this is a kind of a, you can't promote the content everywhere and all, but your social media strategies assign to specific target audiences, engaging them, and then linking them to the specific content. The other thing people typically do is they have vanity URLs when you have a site that is pretty massive. So you can have vanity URLs that are helpful in social media that you don't want to give a very big URL. So you can say inner talent slash, say physics lessons as an example. And in social media, then it's very easily recognizable.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you.
So have you ever seen some product or object that was designed, like the design was so bad that you couldn't actually focus on the product or object itself?
I have to think through, Aishan. I don't recall anything upfront, but I do have scenarios from my experience where my products were just not very good. So the one of the product I'm working on, it came through an acquisition, and the original founders of that product, they were research scientists in Microsoft research, so very techie people. Um, so the slogan for the product was, it's designed by security experts for security experts. So good, and they kind of really prided themselves as saying, okay, this is really techie product, which is all good. The challenge was that when we go to conferences, and you have like rows and rows of these booths, and Rocky can attest to it from his prior life, where people are showcasing their products, and our product shows up, and it looks ugly. Uh, so it's one of those things that it's not just functional aspect of the product, it's the visual aspect of the product that you have to cater to. And because it was looking ugly, anyone, and I was just noticing as I took over that product early this year, that anyone who was demoing it would have kind of a mea culpa statement first, that, hey, sorry, we don't have a best looking product on the show floor. I said, hey, this is not something I want to be proud with my product. So that's something I changed right away. So the different products have different challenges. Some products have functional challenges. Some products have visual challenges. You just have to kind of be very tuned to like what are the weaknesses, and then how do you fix those.
Thank you.
Okay, got a few more minutes. I want to definitely cover the information architecture. So this might be too technical for a lot of you, so my apologies in advance. But from a UI UX perspective, this is critical. And the reason it's critical is obviously you don't have one member in your team. You have multiple members in your team, even as interns. And how do you document what you are thinking properly? And then say next year, a new set of interns come to Inner Talent and they're working on the similar projects. And how do you carry the torch forward? And the big aspect of this is you documented your work and your thought process in a way that anyone else who can come in without you being in the room can understand it clearly, what you were thinking, why you designed the way you design. So this is obviously an industry-wide problem, and there are solutions for it. So the one big solution is something called information architecture, and there are various steps to it. I've put this Adobe best practice for UX designers here. It will be very helpful. But essentially, before you design a website, you put this kind of a framework of various flows in the site, various sections of the site, and the hierarchy within those sections. Now, what you see here is a simple view. You don't see lines across the sections. Uh, and it's kind of deliberate because you want to start with a simple view first. Because if you see, you try to represent that, hey, this fourth box on the in the first column is connected to the second box on the second column and the third box on the third column. Very soon, this will be a very complicated picture. And that, say, 1 year from now, anyone looking at it will not understand, hey, what's going on? So you're not trying to capture every piece of information. You're trying to capture the high level pieces of information that, hey, this is my high level view of the product hierarchy, say 50,000 feet level. And I may have missed certain details, but that's on purpose because I don't want to document every single detail here yet. Okay. And you see the way people use colors here to distinguish different sections. And so there are all these visual clues you will have, icons, colors, things like that. So just to have information and some very simple product hierarchy. But idea is anyone can look at it and they get in 5 minutes what was the purpose. Then I talked about prototyping. So other big aspect is you document the process. This is the engineering process, essentially UI development. So you document your engineering process from step 1 to step 5, whatever the steps you take. So if step 1 is you're collaborating with just paper and pencil, you document that. So you don't trash it. You in today's world, you take a iPhone or picture of it or scan it if it has a lot of details and you document it. So anytime later you go through this and you say, okay, these are the reasons I picked this design in this different style. So if someone else has to refer it back to it, it's easy. It also helps that if your marketing teams and other teams, you mentioned about user testing, you can take this and start to do user testing. You don't have to wait for next 3 or 4 weeks later when this is actually coded. You can start the testing process right away. And that's very helpful. And even for internal buy-in from different stakeholders, this is helpful. Other big aspect in UI is make sure you have a definition of terms. So if you see my first slide is about definition and terms, that everyone uses the same term for the same purpose, even if it's being used like 5 level deeps in the website. That is for consistency. That shows professionalism in the site design. And it basically avoids confusion so that if you have 10 developers and people are just fast putting a UI code and whatever term they can think of, they use that term. You should have kind of a dictionary that you have of term and the description of it, and then people can use the same term everywhere. And when I say same, basically not only the term itself, but like capitalization of it, how you treat it, and things like that. So full definition of it. And this is kind of the full documentation of your all the pages. And this is also crucial. If you're lazy, you might say, hey, I've got the codes and I don't need this. But I think For a more professional kind of documentation, this is a good best practice to make sure every page, the comments on that page, like who worked on it, what was the design or thought process behind it, what is the title and the URL of the page. So essentially, you keep an Excel spreadsheet of all your pages, comments, owners, things like that. You start from day one. So as the pages are being developed, and after they are developed, you have like now the full inventory. So if you try to do this work after you've developed the website, obviously it's too much work. But before you start developing the site, you go through this hierarchy that you have a design first, and then you based on that design, you understand how many pages, you assign ownership of those pages, you give comments in the comments or notes, like some kind of goals for those pages, then you're starting to document things properly. Then very quickly on prototyping. The prototyping is something, again, if you're too lazy, you may say that, hey, I'm a great HTML developer. I can just put a code in half an hour, 1 hour, and I'm good. For very simple sites, that's good enough. But as you start to have more complicated sites and pages, especially interactive pages, it starts to get difficult. And especially if you want to get very quick feedback from your other team members and from your target users. So there are a couple of tools I've listed here: InVision, Balsamiq, Adobe XD. All of them have a free version also, but they all can be subscribed like $20, $50 a month. So they're fairly cheap. And they basically replace this. You could do this with paper and pencil, but if you want to do a slightly better job of designing something like this, then you use something like Balsamiq, and it's fairly popular. And once you put something in Balsamiq, you almost give a feel of a professionally done prototype, and you can start to take it to your end customers and get more real feedback. The usual process of I just wanted to document that for you guys is you identify your target users and goals for the site. You build an information architecture. You start to create prototypes, and then finally you come to implementation. And during all of these steps, you are always checking with various stakeholders and your target audience, like, hey, am I on the same page of what your thoughts are? And by the time you come to implementation, that means the chances of making very basic errors in your implementation will be low. And then after the implementation is done, you again do final testing of your whole site. And a lot of time, even then, people come to a conclusion that I don't think this is the right design, and that's when A and B type of testing comes in. And so if you see even bigger sites like LinkedIn and Facebook, they do A and B testing for after implementation also, after they've gone through all of this, because they still have a confusion of, I don't think this is the right design. So these were the basic things I was planning to cover with you guys. Sorry, the last section I had to rush a bit.
I think it was really helpful in terms of designing, like especially the website and figuring out what we needed and what may not be needed in the website. So thank you again.
I'm part of the business side, but I still felt like this was very useful, especially when you're talking about the SEOs and all that stuff. Plus, I learned a little bit more about the UI and UX experiences, so that was pretty cool too. Thank you.
So once again, I want to thank you, Ranjan, for coming to today's informational and giving the interns this talk. I'm sure they took a lot from it, and I can say as the project director, I also have a lot more clarity as to like where to go in the coming weeks. So thank you for that, and thank you everybody for coming to tonight's informational.
Best of luck, guys, and if you have any questions, reach out to me through Rahul or Aina later on. But yeah, it was fun.